everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Our focus this week turns to Oklahoma's cotton crop. SUNUP's Dave Deacon travels to Jackson County to catch up with our Extension cotton specialist, Seth Byrd.
So right now in sort of mid-July or approaching mid-July, a lot of the crop is starting to get to the blooming stage. At least the part of the crop that's sort of made its progress on a normal pattern. We've had some challenges here in southwest Oklahoma this year. A very dry, very hot, very windy start to the season. We're in a field right now that's drip irrigated cotton that was planted in the first half of May. And a lot of that cotton has had some challenges, but has come out pretty well. And this field is just starting in its bloom stage. It's probably been blooming for maybe a week or a little more. And that's kind of where we'd like to see cotton right now in Oklahoma.
I realized that with cotton it was kind of touch and go whenever it came to planting dates and everything. Kind of talk about what you've seen with the earlier planted varieties versus some of the ones that were later planted.
Yeah, so you know, the earlier planted varieties, we really didn't have a really good green light to say these conditions are perfect to plant. Some of this was planted into marginal conditions, but it turned out okay. We caught some rain in mid-May, and it really helped this cotton come up and turn the corner. Later cotton, particularly in May and even into early June, was planted into pretty good moisture. Right. Unfortunately, it was followed up by kind of the worst case scenario. So we went through a 2-week period of several days that were over 100 and winds that just dried that soil profile out, especially that seed bed. So a lot of the seed had enough moisture when we planted to sprout, to germinate. So germination wasn't a problem, it was emergence. So a lot of those fields were replanted, and they actually got some irrigation water here in the district turned on early. In other areas, obviously, if you have a pivot or another form of irrigation like drip, you can kind of help that out. I've focused a lot, I guess, so far on the southwest corner. As we move north and east, sort of the Carnegie, Fort Cobb area, Hydro area, there's some really good looking cotton up there. Even the dry land up there looks really good. And they haven't been necessarily wet, but they've caught enough rains to put that cotton in a good position. And then as we go further north into the state, it gets, you know, a little more hit and miss. It's been a dry year overall for Oklahoma. And so dryland cotton as a whole has struggled, but we've got good pockets of it.
Moving forward, what are some of the things that producers need to be watching for, but also, you know, keep on the radar to be doing throughout the year?
So always be scouting for weeds this time of year, you know, get that one last shot on. This is an extremely clean field that we're in right now. Right. But, you know, obviously if you've got some escapes from some of your earlier applications, be watching that. Same thing with insects, again, be scouting. And then as we get into this stage, you know, squaring, so we're putting on flower buds or actually blooming and starting to set bolls, our water demand is going to go up. And so we need to make sure that we're following that plant's demand curve with adequate irrigation if we are irrigated. Obviously, if we're dry land, then we're just up to whatever nature throws at us, and we just hope we catch a rain or two. But you know, cotton's definitely on a bell-shaped curve for water, and we're on the increase right now. And so we're gonna keep increasing that demand up to peak bloom, and then it's gonna start to fall off a little bit. And as much as we can match that water use curve without exceeding it or getting into a deficit, that's gonna really optimize not only our inputs, but optimize our yield.
Okay, thank you much, Seth Byrd, Extension Cotton Specialist here at Oklahoma State University. And for more information about growing cotton in Oklahoma, check out our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, is here now. Kim, the USDA released the July WASDE. What's the take-home message?
Well, there's not much change in the market from last month, except maybe in soybeans. You look at wheat ending stocks, increased them to 975 million bushels, 25 million bushel increase, 74 million above last year's level, so not much there. Corn production, they increased to 14.2 billion bushels, up from 14 billion. That could be significant, but however, with exports and such, they lowered corn ending stocks just slightly from 1.58 billion down to 1.55. But you look at soybean production of 4.31 billion bushels, up from 4.28 last month. Exports, this is the number down to 2 billion bushels, down from 2.3 billion bushel estimate last month, and I think that reflects our negotiations. Ending stocks with beans from 385 million bushels up to 580, and they lowered the average annual estimated or projected soybean price 75 cents down to 9 1/4.
Now the 2018-19 wheat marketing year is getting into its 7th week and exports are quite a bit lower. Give us an idea of why.
Well, you look at all wheat exports, export sales, they're down 30% from last year. Hard red winter wheat sales are down 50%. Now, if you'll go back to this time last year, we were expecting or projecting Russia's production, wheat production, to be 2.5 billion bushels. It came in at 3.1. You look at their ending stocks, it's 376 million versus a 280 million average. Russia came in with that 3.1 billion bushel record crop and took exports away from the U.S., away from Canada, away from Australia, and they still have wheat to export during this time period, and therefore they're taking our market, and we have a lower price.
Give us an idea of why Oklahoma prices have dropped $1 since June.
Well, you look at that dollar drop, I think it's, our production, half of a crop for Oklahoma. You look at all hard red winter wheat, around 657 million versus the 830 million average is almost 100 million less than last year. You'd think prices would stay up. However, our protein is the highest in 20 years and we've got the test weight to go with it. We've got an excess of wheat in storage that is relatively low protein. They can take this high protein crop, blend it into that lower protein, get that average up, and they are effectively increasing the exportable and milling supply of hard red winter wheat. Therefore, we have lower prices.
With that in mind, should producers sell their stored wheat?
If they're a third, if they've already sold some, then I'd hold it off a while longer. If they haven't sold any, dollar cost averaging, I'd start working it in the market between now and, say, January 1.
And put the pencil to paper.
Put the pencil to paper.
Thanks a lot, Kim. We'll see you next time.
Hi, I'm Wes Lee, here with your weekly Mesonet weather report. With summer temperatures firmly locked in the 90s and low 100s, it's hard to believe that now is the time to begin planting in the backyard garden for a fall crop. One of the biggest obstacles to overcome can be dealing with high soil temperatures. Garden seeds have an optimal soil temperature, but also a maximum temperature for which they will germinate. For many, this maximum is around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Maximum bare soil temperatures at a 4-inch depth on July 9th range from 89 degrees at Wilburton and Valiant to 107 at Medicine Park near Velma. If we look at a specific location, such as Bristow, we see the incredible warm temperatures for May and early June. The blue fill line is the long-term average air temperature, while the red line is the average air temperature recorded in 2018. If we switch over to soil temperatures at Bristow, we see a very similar trend. The brown fill line is the long-term average 4-inch soil temperature, while the orange line is the actual soil temperature for 2018. Temperatures are now above the 90-degree limit for many seeds, and a temporary cooling of the soil may be necessary for proper germination. A local extension educator can give you some ideas on how to accomplish this. Gary is up next with some changes in the state's drought situation.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, the good news is the trend for drought across western Oklahoma is on the way down, at least for now, but the trend across eastern Oklahoma is on the way up, and also southern Oklahoma. So these are areas we're going to have to watch. Let's get right to the latest drought monitor map and see what we have. Okay, still some of those bad colors, the tans, the browns, the reds across western Oklahoma, out into the far western panhandle, but we actually see some areas devoid of color in Beaver, Harper, and Woods counties. That's the good news. We also have that area of white, which means no abnormally dry conditions even in central over into east central Oklahoma. However, we also see an increase in the bad colors across the eastern parts of the state, especially northeastern and southeastern Oklahoma, where we have severe drought starting to intensify, especially in the far southeast and the extreme northeast. We can see all these on the 30, 60, and 90-day percent of normal rainfall maps from Oklahoma Mesonet. Basically on these maps, the greens and the blues, those are the good colors. The reds, the yellows, the oranges, those are the bad colors. And you can see, especially along the Red River, way too many of those bad colors. But across northwest Oklahoma, those are the good colors. Those are the above normal rainfall amounts. That's where we're seeing that drought reduction across the state. Now, a note of caution. Even those areas of northwest Oklahoma are in danger of drought development. We are in the hottest part of the year. It's tough to get rain this time of the year. So while we're glad to see those colors start to disappear, those are also, unfortunately, areas we're going to have to watch for drought development in the heat of summer. So that's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Of the essential nutrients, nitrogen is the most commonly applied. We have several source options when it comes to both homeowners and ag producers, and there's often several questions when it comes to what are the different sources and what are the importance and the different characteristics. So one of the most commonly sold sources of nitrogen in Oklahoma is anhydrous ammonia. Anhydrous ammonia is a gas form with 82% nitrogen for every pound. So every 100 pounds of anhydrous ammonia, we're going to have 82 pounds of nitrogen. It goes in the soil as a gas and it immediately reacts with H2O, any water into the soil, and it's going to form NH4 and hold onto the soil particle. Then we have urea. Urea is our number 2 and sometimes number 1 fertilizer source. It is by far the greatest dry source. Urea is 46% nitrogen. It's popular because A, it has the highest concentration of nitrogen of a dry product and is fairly safe. So urea comes in with NH2, 2CO. It's applied in the soil. It gets wet. Urease, an enzyme, is going to act upon these particles right here, break off the CO and go NH2 and turn that into NH3, which then reacts with water and goes to NH4. The challenge with urea, while it's a very safe and easy to store dry product, if urea is not incorporated into the soil via tillage or irrigation, there's high probability that with a little bit of moisture, this NH3 can actually be lost in the environment. So in agriculture and other aspects, we're always concerned about nitrogen losses from the application of urea if we don't get a good incorporation. Another less common source of nitrogen is the ammonium sulfate, and this is commonly applied with urea when there's a sulfur demand. Why is it not just applied solely? Because there's only 21% nitrogen. However, ammonium sulfate is a very stable source, but it has the highest acidifying reaction rate as compared to any other nitrogen source, because our source for ammonium sulfate, when we apply directly as a ammonium, goes back to our acidifying factors, and ammonium converts and releases more hydrogen than any of these sources that start out as an NH3. So our most acidifying fertilizer for nitrogen is ammonium sulfate. There are also other sources such as UAN. So UAN stands for urea ammonium nitrate. UAN is a liquid fertilizer source. So it comes in as either a 32% nitrogen or 28% nitrogen with no other nutrients. We'll often use them as top dress or sprayed on as top dress or injected into the soil. It is half urea, half ammonium nitrate, blended in and watered down. These are our primary nitrogen-containing fertilizers that we would use across Oklahoma in agriculture and in the garden. If you have any other questions about nitrogen, check out the SUNUP website at www.sunup.okstate.edu.
Mosquitoes and ticks aren't the only pests that we have to worry about this summer. If you're out in the tall grass or pasture, you may just pick up some microscopic hitchhikers. Yes, we're talking about chiggers. Here's Extension entomologist Eric Rebek.
So chiggers are a family of mites that belong to the family Trombiculidae, and we have a couple of species in North America that can cause us some problems. Chiggers feed in their larval state by injecting a digestive toxin under the skin, and then they feed on the dead skin cells that result from that activity. Chiggers are non-burrowing mites, and so they'll take that meal of dead skin cells and then they'll immediately drop off to continue their life cycle. Later stages of the nymph will not feed on animals anymore, and neither will the adults. So it's really just this first larval stage of the mites that do their feeding. Usually environments such as this is where we are going to pick up chiggers, areas where we have long grass, tall grass. They do tend to clump together, so it's not as if this entire field is infested, but we do have a tendency sometimes to walk into a patch of these mites. So protecting yourself with long pants, ideally with grass this tall, I'd be wanting to wear long sleeves as well. And then having an insect repellent, products containing 15 to 20% DEET would be best, or eucalyptus oil is another option. And so these are the best things we can do to try to prevent access of the mites to our skin. Yeah, so the bite itself, first of all, our skin reacts to that digestive enzyme, and so you get that reaction. It's both a physical or a mechanical and a chemical reaction, essentially. Then we also get basically a dermatitis. You get an allergic reaction, if you will, to that bite, so your body's immune response to the bite. All of these things together cause our skin to react and form a welt, large, painful, itchy, red swelling of that area. What we recommend is if you have encountered chiggers and you are experiencing some bites, as soon as possible, go home and wash all of your clothes that you were wearing in at least 125 degree Fahrenheit wash cycle. Then, as soon as possible, jump into the shower, take a hot shower, take a hot bath, lather up as much as possible with that soap. Again, the mites aren't there, but you're trying to kind of, you're basically reacting or trying to stave off that itching and that burning from the bite itself.
Trade in the agriculture world is big news right now. And Derrell, how is supply and demand in the beef market going so far?
Well, if you look at the first half of the year, I think, we're kind of as expected at this point. Supply is bigger. Actually carcass weights, which are up this year over last year, are not up as much. We're watching that in the second half of the year, but I think it's going to temper our increase in beef production a little bit. Drought conditions had us very concerned a couple months ago. We've moderated a bunch of that in the southern plains. We still have some drought conditions farther in the southwest, but in terms of beef market impacts, much less potential for impact. So through the first half of the year, I think we're in pretty good shape. Demand has been pretty good so far this year.
So is the recent trade data, is it any encouraging at all, or?
Well, again, the trade data runs about 2 months behind, so the latest data for the month of May for beef was extremely positive. We had about a 21% increase on a year-over-year basis for the month of May. We were up in most of our major markets. Pork and poultry a little bit less encouraging in that respect, but the beef trade has been very, very good so far this year.
So, the trade war right now is just really big news. How might that affect beef markets in the coming months?
Well, it's very difficult to sort all that out. It's a very complex situation. There's a lot of dimensions. Beef is directly targeted in a couple of the tariffs, Canada and China, but really the greater potential for impact is going to be in the indirect and secondary impacts. If we have huge impacts on the pork market, we've got record pork supplies, that could weigh on the domestic market, and that in turn could affect beef markets. Consumers are going to see higher prices for some goods if these tariffs stay in place for any length of time. Over time, that may actually have a negative impact on beef demand as consumers are forced to reallocate their spending a little bit. Our import tariffs on steel are actually raising input costs for farm equipment manufacturing and other inputs. So there's a host of things that could play out here. It will take some time, but over time we could see accumulating effects of all of this.
So switching gears a little bit, you recently led a group of Oklahoma cattlemen to Mexico. Talk a little bit about that experience and what they got to experience.
We had a very enjoyable and a very educational trip, I think. The group got to see how cattle get across in terms of cattle that are exported from Mexico to the U.S. And then we traveled to a ranch in northern Chihuahua. You know, late June in northern Mexico is about the driest time of the year. So it really illustrated the challenges that those producers face at this time of the year. And we had a very productive final dinner with some cattlemen in Chihuahua that was a very good conversation of cattleman to cattleman.
Yeah, and it's always good to share that information between cattlemen to cattlemen as well.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks, Derrell. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist at Oklahoma State University.
Here in the haying season, we want to remember that putting up hay is an expensive proposition, and we want to save as much hay as possible to have available to feed the cows next winter. Therefore, hay storage is a very, very important part of the management of getting the hay up and ready to feed the cows. Research has been done at several universities looking at different storage methods of big round bales and how much hay loss actually occurs. In Tennessee several years ago, they found that big round bales in their environment, stored on the ground with no cover on them, lost 37% of the dry matter weight between the time of the hay being harvested and when it was fed in January. That's a huge loss. Even with net wrap, they found 19% loss in that time frame. Now, research here in Oklahoma, in a somewhat drier climate, still has shown us that hay that's been stored on the ground with no cover over it, we can expect about a 20% dry matter loss in the time between when we harvest it and when we feed it next winter. If we can find something like, say, old car tires, wood pallets, anything to get this hay up off of the ground can make a huge difference. In the research here, it reduced the hay loss about half. In other words, 10% hay loss. If that hay was stored off of the ground and with some kind of a cover, a plastic tarp or canvas tarp, then that hay loss dropped to about 4%. And so we've got a tremendous difference here in the amount of hay that potentially we can lose in the time between it's harvested and when it's fed, just by the way we store it. Also, the way that we orient these bales, if we're going to store them for a long period of time, is pretty important. We want to orient the rows going north and south. That way the prevailing winds will be able to go between the rows and help keep that hay dry. Also, we'd like to give about 2 to 3 feet area between the rows. Again, that allows for air movement and helps to dry out that area between the bales. These things can all help us in terms of saving the hay that we put up this summer so there's more of it, a little higher quality hay available to feed next winter when our cows really need it. Hey, we hope you'll tune in again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
For the past few months, we've been talking with Alex Rocatelli about a pasture rehabilitation project, and this week, the results are in.
So we are here back in the pasture rehab location after the first cut, and as you can see, we really got a good production this year. According to the history that we have here, this year we more than doubled the production. The reasons are, first, Mother Nature. We get a good rainfall during the growing period until the first cut, about 8 inches of rain. At the top of that, second, we fertilized. We put around 150 pounds of urea, that translates about 7 pounds of nitrogen, actual nitrogen. And as we know, the rule of thumb, for every 50 pounds of nitrogen, we are going to promote 1 ton of production per acre in Bermuda grass pastures. Now, that would explain why we doubled the production. However, we more than doubled the production, and the reason for that might be weed control. So in the end, we got around 115 bales, 5x5 bales that weigh around 1,000 pounds in a total of 30 acres. That translates in a total production of a little more than 2 tons per acre. For the location that we are, in a pasture that we are trying to rehab, that is a very good production. On the other hand, when you talk about quality, well, the overall quality of this pasture was fair. A crude protein around 7.5, 7.8 across all the field, and a TDN of 58%, so that is what we call a fair hay quality. However, when we are talking about growing steers or heifer calves, we might need to supplement if you want to use this hay for them. About that region there, northeast portion of this pasture, we have a higher concentration of Johnson grass. And the quality there was slightly higher. We are talking about 9.3 in crude protein and 59 in TDN. When things get right, as this year we have good rainfall, we didn't have a dry period, we can have from Johnson grass good forage quality without the nitrate toxicities. For instance, we just get about 1,000 ppm of nitrates in the Johnson grass here. That is very low. We need at least 3,000 for this start to be toxic to the animals, thanks to the good rainfall that we have. The main reason that we didn't get better quality from this pasture is not related to the pasture at all, but was related to the timing of cut. We delay to cut this Bermuda grass pasture. We cut 11 weeks after it start growing. That is too much. We're supposed to be cutting for a crude protein of 13, 14% between 5 to 6 weeks. That would be the target time. So in the second cut, next time we are gonna try to be a little earlier in the cut.
And that'll do it for us this time. Remember, you can find us anytime on our website and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone. And remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.